This podcast could potentially have adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly the possibility of sexual content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, Drinking with Authors fans. We have some pretty big news from your host here, Erica Lance. We are moving to change the format of the show to be one episode. So there's a few episodes that were recorded the old way that we're doing the new way, and that's what you're listening to. So thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we love having you as fans. On to the show.
Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I'm your host, Erica Lance. Today, we have a special kind of event and a demon cat in the background. But the special event is we have multiple people on. Very, very cool. So welcome, Robert Crane and Theresa Griffin Kennedy.
Hi, cheers.
Authors. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Cheers.
Cheers. Okay, let's talk about what we're drinking for a moment. I have discovered and I'm kind of in love with this thing called Nixie, which is a sparkling water. Apparently it's organic, which I think water should be, but whatever. This one is watermelon mint, but I put gin in it because that's what I do. Anyway, I'm enjoying this immensely. Robert, what are you drinking there?
I am drinking Kettle One on the rocks in a Glenlivet glass.
Wow. Oh, multi-drinks. I like it.
I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says the Glenlivet.
Yeah. I can kind of read it, but I trust you. I trust you in your glasses. Theresa, what are you drinking with us?
I have my container here with my Vanport container. It's a business in Portland. I'm drinking a mimosa with ice cubes.
Mimosa with ice cubes.
I don't drink very often.
I'm not even sure how that would. Okay, I'm going to trust you on that because I like
it a little diluted.
I can understand that. She's like, I can't get too drunk in the first 15 minutes. That would be bad.
I'm a total lightweight.
That's okay. I have a couple of, one of my co-hosts is allergic to alcohol, so she normally drinks tea. Shout out to JM. Okay, so you guys wanted to come on. There is actually technically three of you. There's one here in spirit, right?
Yes.
And his name is Joe Coyle?
Yes.
Joe Coyle. So tell me about the three of you, the tripod of epicness. Explain.
Do you want to start, Bob?
Yeah, I'll start. No, I had the pleasure of meeting Theresa on the internet, where I guess a lot of people meet nowadays, and we started sharing. Yeah, I saw the stuff she was writing, and she goes across the board. She writes fiction, nonfiction, reportage, poetry, memoir, everything. I was reading some of her stuff and I went, wow, this is really cool. Then I sent her a story that I pulled out of the cardboard box and she read it. And because Theresa has her own publishing company, Oregon Greystone Press, she puts together, different books and different subjects and genres. And we started talking about doing a short story book together.
Oh.
And here it is. Oops, there it is. And it happens to feature a photograph, cover photograph. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
By Joe Coyle, the aforementioned Joe Coyle, who's not with us today. But Theresa and I traded stories. We liked what we were reading. And we said, let's expand this into more people. And go ahead, Theresa.
Yeah, Bob actually was able to connect with so many wonderful people, and Joe Coyle was just one of them. He's an actor, and I Googled him. I did research, and he's an amazing actor. He's been in some really important films. He's a character actor. He's worked with everyone, Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, all the major stars. And he's a really great actor, but he's also a writer. And so Bob got me in touch with him, and really Bob was the backbone of this entire project because of the people he knows and his old friends. And we got really amazing blurbs for the book. But I wanted to put together an anthology. And so I did a shout out here in Portland and didn't get any responses, which is typical. Portland is a really small town. And and Bob and I were friends on Facebook and had been chatting. And he said, I have this short story, would you like to read it? And I said, sure. And so he mailed it. And I actually have the original over here in my file cabinet. It's yellowed. It's probably 25 or 30 years old. And it's an amazing story because when you read between the lines, you see Bob's history in the story. And that's what made it so special. So this was a really demanding project because it was my first anthology. I had some issues with the graphic designer who had some health problems. And so there was a lot of touch and go, and it was very, very stressful. I learned a lot from it, though. But Bob was the backbone of the entire project.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I was the editor.
Yeah, you made it. Yeah, you can. I don't know if you can read this, but it says edited by. Can you read that?
Yeah. So, what started this entire anthology project? Like, what was the genesis idea? We're going to sit down and write about this. I have a publishing company as well, and we put out anthology calls every year, really to give new authors a chance to get published. Because, we all know it's exciting when you get a story and you're published. You're like, woo! I mean, it's great when it's a book, but if it's a short story, you're like, I'm published, But, and I know how we come up with some of the ideas, mainly because of things that we find funny. Like I did an anthology called Super Useless, and I had everybody write stories about useless superpowers that people had.
That's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah. But what was the genesis of this anthology?
For me, it was, I just wanted to do an anthology because they're so popular in Portland. And I have always enjoyed working with other writers. And I just wanted to create an anthology. And I had wanted to call it by the title of my short story, my long short story, which is in the book, and that's called Squirrely Conversation Outside Bishop's House. So that was the original title. It was going to be my short story. So, I was the one doing it. So I decided that would be the title. And we talked about the title later, and Joe and Bob came up with some really great suggestions. And I realized, I've always known how important it is to collaborate. So I wanted everyone who was involved to know this was a collaboration. We were going to all work together. I wasn't going to be, the end. I wasn't going to be bossy or anything like that, as some editors can be. And I wanted it to be more like a collaboration. But
she is a taskmaster.
As one taskmaster to another, I appreciate that greatly.
Oh yeah.
Because I think authors need that. You need somebody to be like, hey, get this done. Because otherwise we're great at loitering around as authors. We're like, we're going to go do this thing over here, have a sandwich and watch Netflix and not do anything we're supposed to be doing.
I feel like I'm a really good editor, but I have certain rules for myself. Never rush anything, and don't rush other writers, because when you rush, that's when mistakes happen. And really the biggest challenge of this anthology was the graphic designer had some health issues. And so he wasn't able to do his best. And so I had to get another graphic designer to finish the project. And once I did that, it was smooth sailing. That's the frustrating part for me as a publisher and an editor. I can do everything else except graphic design. And that's the most expensive part of publishing, because it's between $3,000 and $5,000 for a book. And that's the most frustrating part for me, is it's always coming up with that money to pay the graphic designer, because I can do all the other stuff,
Yeah. And the thing that sold me on Theresa, I mean, I mentioned to you about all the styles that she writes in, and they're all excellent. I've seen across the board, and some of the other books that she's done for her company. Here's what sold me. She writes sex really well. Well. Oh, man. I was sitting here reading these short stories, and there's, some sexual content within the story. I'm going, this is not embarrassing. this is really, really good. And that sold Theresa for me. I said, yeah, I want to work with this woman. Man, she's good.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I love the giggling. The giggling is absolutely making this, and the lovely shade of red you're turning that is matching your lipstick. I do enjoy that as well. I say that only because one of my partners in crime is an erotica writer as well. So am I. And what it's interesting is not everybody can write sex, and not everybody can write sex well.
No.
Exactly.
No.
So yeah, there's a Kindle unlimited plethora of badly written sex.
Oh, God.
And then there's 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
And there's also the Bad Sex Award in England, which is very famous.
Yeah.
For authors that write particularly bad sexual, content. Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Bad Sex Award. I'm going to look this up.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's really funny.
Theresa, do you remember one offhand? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you remember one of the really bad sex awards?
Oh gosh, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I was writing an essay called "Sex Writing in Literature" because I started doing research, and because I was thinking about writing a book about sex, which is basically my 2021 first novel, Talionic Night in Portland, a love story. And so I was doing research, and I came across all these articles that were written by men saying that women couldn't write sexual content. And I was like, what? Yeah. So I got really incensed, and I spent about a year writing this essay, Sex Writing in Literature. And I still have it. It's on my Medium or my Substack page. And I found this award, the Bad Sex Award. And they were using these mostly English writers to really kind of put on the spot and humiliate. And it made me really angry, but I can't remember a specific one.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just, if you could remember. Yeah,
but I mean, comparing women's genitalia to oysters and things like that. I think Marquis de Sade was mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, there is an amazingly funny podcast. I think they're wrapping their final season, or they just did, called My Dad Wrote a Porno. And wow. It's an English guy whose retired father wrote a pornographic novel. Wow. And it is terrible. And the podcast is him reading this novel. Like, he reads a chapter, a podcast with friends of his, right? He reads the book aloud to two friends of his. And like, one of the first things his dad compares women's breasts to is pomegranates. They were like two dangling pomegranates.
Oh, God.
Just for the record, no woman wants her breasts compared to dangling pomegranates. And it's said in a way that's supposed to be alluring, but it is, if you ever get a chance to listen, it is one of the most hysterical, because his dad put this book up on Amazon by himself, posted it there, and they started doing this podcast. And of course the book started selling like crazy, because everybody's like, what the hell is this book? Right. Yeah. And so his dad continued to write them. He didn't get any better, because his dad doesn't get that they're kind of making fun of him. And they're not doing it in a mean way, but it's just like comparing women's genitalia to oysters.
I do remember one section of this article on the Bad Sex Award, and one of the authors was a man author from England, and he had written a passage comparing this male character's sexual prowess to being that of a jackhammer. He was a jackhammer. And that's another one. Never compare sex. Use the word jackhammer to, it's terrible.
Yeah. My dad didn't write pornos. He just filmed them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
your dad was fantastic.
He videotaped them. Yeah.
Mr. Crane, who was your father?
My dad was the late Hogan's Heroes star, Bob Crane.
Oh, wow.
I grew up watching, had a huge crush on. He was the quintessential cool guy, handsome, funny, smart. Yeah.
Thanks, Theresa.
Yes, no, crushing.
He,
Wow.
he was a great guy. He should not have been married. He was married twice. But back in the 60s and 70s, long before most of your audience was born, there was the videotape explosion.
Oh, what pray tell is a videotape, Robert? You got to.
Wow. Yeah, I know. See, you're too young for this.
No, I'm 1973, my friend. 1973. I remember videos. I remember the great VHS beta tape war.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
Sure.
remember that. The absolute wrong product won that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And so everybody got a home video unit because it was instantaneous. You could do whatever you want and watch it back immediately. So, some people took it to the next step, including my father, and videotaped sexual encounters and, women who wanted to pose in front of the camera so they could watch it back instantly. And, it was like a moving Polaroid. For anybody who remembers Polaroids, they were still instantaneous images, but this was thousands of instantaneous images that you could watch back like that. So everybody was doing all sorts of,
Nefarious,
non-sexual and sexual things on video. And
well, I think that any product like that, people's first inclination is to go, how do we use this for sex?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, I feel like that's like the automatic thing. Like, well, how do we do that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but what got you into, we're going to take both your stories here, but Bob, what got you into writing? What made you decide to start writing?
Well, I admired my dad's drive, and he was talented in certain areas. He was started on I'll make this short.
That's okay.
Started on the radio, and he was an incredible radio personality of the 50s and 60s in Connecticut, which is where I was born, and we moved to Los Angeles, and he was on the one of the major stations in Los Angeles. And then from there, he went into acting. And then the other highlight, of course, as far as I'm concerned, was Colonel Hogan, which my father was born to play. And he just had that, like Theresa alluded to, the quick, sarcastic wit, good-looking guy. It just all came together. And of course, the rest of the cast and everything. And they, such a bizarre idea at that time for Hogan's Heroes, but it all worked. And those were really the two highlights of his work as far as I was concerned.
So, and that caused you to want to do writing?
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot your question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's cheers.
Yeah.
That's what we
cheers.
do here.
It's the kettle wine is already kicking in. No, yes. As I knew I was not an actor. I watched my dad do it. He was very comfortable and relaxed being in front of a camera. I knew that was not me. So what else do? You write about it. So I stayed behind the camera and started. I was very fortunate to, back in the days of magazines, hook up with magazines like OUI, which was owned by Playboy. Playboy magazine and a bunch of others, Penthouse, and places that publish. They happen to have, nude women in them, but they also publish articles and interviews, which is what I was interested in, getting information out of people in either an article or a Q&A. And that's how I started. I loved getting info out of people like you're doing with us.
Yes. No, I think it's incredibly fun to do that.
Yeah.
So what transitioned you into writing books then?
Just to take it longer, like, for instance, one of the people in our short story book, here you go.
I like your shameless plugs. You're doing a good job with that.
is Christopher Fryer, who I've worked with on 3 books. Bruce Dern, Jack Nicholson, and another shameless plug. I just happen to have these books, close by. Crane. There we go.
Yeah, great book.
And we worked together on those. And in the case of Bruce Dern, we interviewed him a couple of times for different magazines. And then we thought, well, he's got so many stories. This guy is just a treasure trove of Hollywood stories. Let's expand it. So we talked him into a book, and we came out with his autobiography a number of years ago. And just to take it longer, because there's so many stories in it with these people like Nicholson and what have you. I worked on a book with Tom Mankiewicz. He was part of the Mankiewicz family. His dad was Joe, the director, writer. And he has, again, just a treasure trove of stories. So I had interviewed him, and then we expanded Tom Mankiewicz into a book, and just to give more space for more stories. So that's how the books started.
Very cool. So then, Theresa, where does your journey begin, my friend?
I felt the inclination to write when I was 12. I always wanted to write. I was a reader. My father, my father was in World War II. He was 46 when I was born, so he was already a mature adult. And he was a reader. My mother was a reader. I was just constantly exposed to them reading. And so I became a reader. And I felt the inclination to start writing when I was 12. And I had a little diary. And of course, I'm the 7th of 9 Irish Catholic children.
Oh, so, wow.
My sisters got into my diary and made comments, and that ended that. So when I finally left home when I was 18 and moved in with my first husband, that's when I really started to seriously write. And my father, who his name was Dorsey Griffin, he encouraged me to write. He was also a writer and an author. He wrote a couple of books on Oregon history. He wrote a few poems. And so he was always encouraging me from about the time I was 18 or 19 to write and to go to college, which eventually I did. But yeah, that's basically how it started for me.
So what was your first published work then, Theresa? What was the first for realsy published work?
My dad told me, number one, you have to have range. He always pressed that idea. And he told me, when you can, you need to create a website. So I created a website. I've been online since 2007. And I wrote and published letters to the editor with newspapers, personal essays, historical profiles, things like that on my website. But I didn't actually publish a book until 2016 when I co-authored a book called Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland, Sex, Vice, and Misdeeds in Mayor Baker's Reign. Really
easy for you to say.
I was like, that is a mouthful.
It's ridiculous.
I'm a ridiculous mouthful of a title, but it sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, it was all right. It could have been better. I co-authored it with my dear friend, J.D. Chandler, who passed away about 2 years ago at the age of 60. He didn't take care of himself, and I'm still mad at him. But we co-authored it together, and I wanted to go over it a couple more times, and he didn't. We had to keep the deadline. Deadline's always so important to him, and it's an okay book. It could have been better, but that was the first book. And then later that year, I published my first solo book, which was my book of poetry, which is called Blue Reverie and Smoke. And I was able to get a man named Dan Raphael to write the foreword. And Dan Raphael is a really, really prominent poet in Portland, Oregon. Anyone who's in the poetry scene knows who Dan is. So I asked him if he would look at it, and he said, well, I can't promise you anything. I'll have to read it first. And I sent it to him, and he read it, and he loved it, and he wrote a really wonderful foreword for the book. And then after that, I wrote my book of short stories in 2018, which was Burnside Field Lizard and Selected Stories. And that was selected as a finalist for the Next Generation Indie Book Award 2019. And then in 2021, I published my first novel. 2021, and that's called Taylanic Night in Portland, A Love Story. And that was longlisted with the Clue Award and the Somerset Award. It didn't win anything, but being longlisted in 2 National Book Awards is okay.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing.
And then in 2022, we published the anthology, Beyond Where the Buses Run Stories, through Oregon Greystone Press. And then I was also, I had a book published through the History Press again, The Lost Restaurants of Portland, Oregon. And that's done pretty well. I'm not writing for them anymore because they don't pay authors enough. They pay authors 9%, and I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah.
But I am working on a second restaurant book that I might finish in the next year to 18 months, and I will be publishing that through Oregon Greystone Press because I want more than 9%.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very interesting you bring that up, because I have to say, with 9%, History Press is one of the large imprints because they do publish a lot. I have a friend that writes with them.
Yeah.
And he writes Erie, Florida, and Freaky Florida. He's actually one of my co-hosts too. But they pay a lot more than some of the other big ones do.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you.
That's always interesting. But that seems like a very interesting journey, starting from 12 years old to getting into. Do you think COVID had anything to do with your books actually getting done? I'm just asking because a lot of people managed to get stuff done during sort of the COVID time period.
I know. And I think that a lot of some of those people are people that aren't really long-time writers. They're the kind of people that, I've always wanted to write this book. I'll do it because COVID's here, because I was being published before COVID and after COVID. But COVID made things harder because I was finishing the restaurant book during that time, and it definitely made things harder. But yeah, I don't know.
What made you get into publishing?
Well, my husband, Don Dupay, is a retired police detective with the Portland Police Bureau, and he wrote his memoir, which is called Behind the Badge in River City, a Portland Police Memoir. He wrote that in 1991 and 1992, about 235 pages of typed content. And when we got together and we became friends, and later we became closer.
We're going to use quotations. It's fine. We're all getting the intimation. Continue.
Yeah, he brought out the manuscript that he had typed. It was in a box, old school, and I looked at it, and he's a prolific writer, and he had written a novelized account of the life of a pedophile called Touched, and he wanted me to focus on that. And when I saw both of the manuscripts together, I knew that the police memoir was the golden egg. So I said, we really need to focus on this, and it wasn't publishable at the time. It was a really good, long kind of outline, but it needed to be fleshed out a lot. It needed a lot of editing. So we worked on it for 2.5 years. And then in 2015, when it was finished, we started submitting it. And we knew that it wasn't going to be received well, because he's basically sharing all of this information about police corruption with the Portland Police Bureau and the things he experienced. He was on from 1961 to 1978 when he resigned because the job was really killing him. So I knew that it wasn't going to be easy to be published. We sent it around. We got the usual rejections. There's a press with Portland State University. I can't remember what they're called, but they looked at it for a while, and then they passed. They looked at it for about 3 months, and we were emailing back and forth, and they finally passed too, because it's too controversial. They didn't want to get involved. And so we realized really the only way we were going to see this book come out is if we published it ourselves. So we got in touch with a woman named Patricia Marshall. She runs Luminaire Press, and she taught me a lot. And she said, you don't want to self-publish. She said, you want to create a name. And I came up with Oregon Greystone Press. And she helped us publish the book, and that was really how it started. And he published his second book, which was a novel, in 2019. called Frank's Revenge, Albina After Dark, which is kind of a novelized account of various things he saw. But it's also, it's a novel, it's fiction. And he's in the process of, we're in the process of publishing his third book, which is called The Tainted Rose, Stories from a Portland Detective, also nonfiction. So Dawn and I decided that we would take William Randolph Hearst's advice when he said, if you own the newspaper, you can write what you want. So we're like, okay, we need to take the bull by the horn,
Yeah.
Oh my God, I like that. I love that you said that.
Hey, listeners, you know me, Erica Lance. You're just listening to me in the podcast that you had. But guess what? I'm doing something new.
Yeah, she's joining me, Mark Muncy, the author of the Erie, Florida book series in Erie, Appalachia. And we are hosting a new podcast called Erie Travels.
Woo-woo! Erie Travels, which covers things like ghosts, cryptids, weird stuff, UFOs, men in black, all kinds of fun things that people talk about, and I'm sure you've discussed with friends.
Yep, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or find us at erietravels.com and join in the fun and all the spooky goodness.
And of course, Mark, what do we always say?
We'll see you on the other side.
So you've written this anthology. Let's talk about gathering all the authors to do this, because we actually haven't on this show talked a lot about getting together a bunch of people to do something at the same time, because it's hard enough trying to get yourself to do something at the same time, but other humans, right? So how did you solicit the stories?
Well, it helped that Bob knows everyone. Bob was really the one that was able to get all the great writers, and it just worked out so well,
Well, the easiest part was Theresa and me working together. Then once we got other people involved, it becomes, complicated. But I think my opinion is, I think we got some really good and varied styles out there. The aforementioned Chris Fryer, the aforementioned Joe Coyle. Then there was a woman named Kari Hildebrand, and I found these in a box, and I sent them to Theresa, and I said, use any of them, use none of them, whatever you want to do. And she liked 4 of them because they're really short. So they became kind of buffers between the longer pieces for the book. Because you have, Theresa's got 2 stories, and so we have to space those out so they weren't just back to back. And, so the way it worked out, I thought was kind of good with buffering and different styles and like that. Yeah.
Kari Hildebrand's stories were really just very good, very original, very, very touching, very sweet. I really enjoyed them. And so I think you did send me 4, and I think I used all of them.
I think so. Yeah.
3 of them are shorter, and then one of them is a longer short story she wrote. But and then Christopher Fryer's story is the first story in the book, Hunting License. It's amazing. He's such a great writer. It's really, really good. And then Joe Coyle's story is it was a very interesting story, and I had to read it a couple of times.
I'm still reading it.
It's very mysterious and really makes you think. Because he's a great writer, and then of course Bob's story, Wingding, a wonderful, wonderful story, very long, short story, and just a wonderful story that a lot of the best critics who provided blurbs were able to read and really see things in between the lines, and it's just a wonderful story.
So that has to be interesting, being an editor. When did you start editing, Theresa?
Well, my father goes back to my dad. He told me when I was 18, Theresa, I think you could be a writer. And we talked about it. He said, you have to start keeping a journal every day. You have to write every day just about what's going on in your life. And I did that for 15 years before I finally went into college when I was 35 and completed my college education. But he told me, he gave me so much good advice over the years. And I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I loved wherever you were going with that, but it was about when you started editing.
When I started editing, okay. I remember it well. When I started reading like an editor is when I realized I could edit. And that was probably about 15 years ago. I'd be reading a novel or a book and I'd think, that's dumb. I wouldn't have written it that way. And so I really actually started editing in 2015. Well, no, in 2013. When I started working on Dawn's memoir. We worked on that for 2.5 years. I had to kind of, I was basically in charge of the whole project. And it was really demanding. We had to go over everything again and again. And it was hard for him because these were horrible memories. And he was, oftentimes he would get upset and he'd have to take a break. That was when I started editing. And, it's a good book. It's filled with mistakes. We did do a second edition in 2016, the following year, where I was able to correct some of the mistakes. And we were able to include an additional story and include additional photographs. But it's a quintessential first book. It's got the punctuation's crazy. That's on me. I'm still learning how to use apostrophes and commas. And but that was basically my first attempt at editing. But I've learned over the years how to edit well. And it just means going over things and doing a line by line edit 50 or 60 times. For example, my book, my novel, Taylanic Night in Portland, there were a couple people wanted to know who is your editor? It's so tight. Who is your editor? And I'm like, I'm the editor. Nobody edited that book. I did. You can do it. People say, oh, you can't edit your own work. You have to have a professional editor. Not if you're an editor. You can do it. I've read several books over the years written by authors who maybe only wrote 1 or 2 books, but they worked on it for 10 years. So by the time they're done with it, it's as clean and tight as it's ever going to be. And that's basically what I've learned about editing. You just have to go over it again and again and again, and hope that you were able to get a good graphic designer.
I think that's true, but I will say this. I think you're a little bit of an exception and not the rule. One is I don't think anybody should take 10 years with their book. Must go faster. And yes. I have met many editors that can't edit their own work because I think it takes a certain mindset to be able to relook at your stuff. Even as a writer, going through it certain number of times, at least like for me, I start getting like, I'm not even seeing what's on the page anymore. Even if I do the different font and print it out and all the other stuff, I'm like, I have to sometimes just let it go because otherwise I over edit my work.
Yeah.
I
that's exactly right. And I agree with you there because especially young people in their 20s and 30s that want to be famous, and they say, I've been writing for 6 years and I'm not famous yet. I haven't made $1 million, But yeah, it's true. And I also agree that most books shouldn't take more than about 3 years to write. That's generally how long it takes me. It took me 3 years to write my novel, about 3.5 years. It took me 3.5 years to write that restaurant book, which that was a nightmare. But yeah, it shouldn't take 10 years. But I do know of a couple writers in Portland that published their first book. One woman, I think she said she was working on hers for 12 years. So when she published it, it was really, really tight. And it's a charming book. It's very charming, but definitely not written the way I would write a book.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's, different people like to read different styles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that and that's why all different kinds of writers have different voices, which can be amazing,
Yeah. I love to read. I love to read everything. I think I've got about 1,200 books here at the house, and I love everything, nonfiction, fiction, poetry, biography. I just love to read all the time. If I don't read all the time, I get really nervous. I have a lot of nervous energy. But yeah, writing is just, for me, and I know that this is true for Bob too. It's just, I think we're both introverts, and it's just a way to express yourself. It's a way to get your feelings and thoughts out without killing someone.
Yeah, that's a good thing. You should probably not kill people. I've discovered that's frowned upon or illegal. I'm not sure which it is, but it's one of those two.
Yeah. But I have to write every day. I definitely have to write every day. And so.
Well, I think authors should write every day. I think even if it's for 10 minutes, you should sit down and write every day, because that's how you actually get work done, is by doing it. If you wait to have a perfect environment to write, then it's never a good thing.
Yeah. I've done some of my best writing in chaos, with dogs barking and cats jumping on me and the phone ringing, I need things like, I like to listen to classical music or jazz or blues. That helps a lot. Coffee helps, but not too much. Chocolate is nice.
Chocolate is a great motivator. I'm a big fan of the chocolate motivation. So let's talk about what's coming up for you guys. So, Bob, what is next up for you?
I'm working on a piece right now called My Unhollywood Family. My Unhollywood Family.
Okay.
And I focus on, I've had 4 parents. My 2 blood parents, a stepfather who just passed away, and a stepmother.
Okay.
And I'm still trying to make sense of this whole thing. I thought I knew, well, I won't speak for everybody, but I thought my parents were the rock. They know everything. They're my parents, Then they divorced. And we went, oh, okay, wait a minute. And as I said earlier, my dad should never have been married anyway. Then he married an actress who was on Hogan's, and they had a child together, and then he was killed, and it didn't last long. In the meantime, my mom married I love this. The Hollywood Reporter used to say, non-pro. You're a non. He married a non-pro. Like you're just a nothing. Like you're just totally worthless. But my stepdad, Chuck, just a wonderful person, just died 95 years old. He stepped into a family. He had no children of his own from a previous marriage. He steps into a marriage situation with my mom. He picks up 3 kids immediately, me and 2 sisters.
Oh, wow.
He picks up an ex-husband who still talks to my mom. He picks up my dad's brother, who's still there, his mother, who is still there. He's got this whole collection of people now. We call him St. Charles. We call him Chuck, St. Charles, because he's a saint and put up with all of this. And now I'm trying to figure out this whole thing in my old age. Do we really ever know our parents? And if, when the divorce bomb went off, that shook our foundation. It was like, what? We were the first people on our block going through a divorce.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's embarrassing. It's, people look at you, well, what's wrong with these people? Oh, they're showbiz carny people, that's where they're from. And then we had my stepdad step in and hook up with my mom. And this guy was the total opposite of show business. He couldn't care less about show business. He and my mom would see a movie, and I'd go, Chuck, what did you guys see? I don't know. Ask your mom. Who was in it? The only person he ever knew was Clint Eastwood. If it was any other actor or actress, ask your mother. I don't. And it was such a refreshing thing for our family, like this real non-show business person that we just loved him so much. Anyway, long story short, this is what I'm looking at now and writing about.
That sounds wonderful. I love that title. Yeah, that is a great title. I love that. Also, the child of divorce. I was 6 when my parents divorced in, I think, 1971 or 72. And I honestly thought it was my fault. I thought, because back then nobody talked to you. They didn't talk to me. They didn't sit me down, and they didn't talk to any of us and say, we just don't get along. All of a sudden, my dad just left,
Oh, God.
So, yeah.
And how long did you carry that on your shoulders that it was your fault?
Oh, gosh, probably for 6 or 7 years, and then I eventually, you grow up and you realize it's not my fault. But when it happened, I really did think it was my fault.
Yeah.
That I had done something. I'd been naughty. It must have been me.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, my parents divorced when I was really young too. So, I think it's very interesting also when you think of how family dynamics like that have changed. You know what I mean? And it sort of cyclically, it went from the 50s housewife sort of thing.
Yeah.
To free love and all this stuff. And, oh, wait, you don't have to get married forever. Like, I think it was a thing that you did have to get married forever,
Yeah.
That's what you did. And
if you didn't, it was like, what's wrong with you,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, Theresa, what's next on the books for you, my friend?
Well, we're working right now to finish Dawn's 3rd book, which is The Tainted Rose Stories from a Portland Detective. There's 4 stories. The first story is about some jewel thieves he arrested. The second story is about the troubled women of Albina. So women that he arrested, women that he had to deal with. He's very compassionate towards women. The third story is about his Black girlfriend who was murdered in 1980. And her name was Artent Thomas. She was really beautiful, and she was viciously murdered by an ex-boyfriend who found out she was engaged to a white man who used to be a cop. And so that's the third story. The fourth story is about how heroin came to Portland, Oregon. And so it's basically about his career. So that's the book we're working on right now. I just started writing a second book on restaurant history, which I am calling A Second Helping, Revisiting Portland's Lost Restaurants. So I figure that'll be done probably in a year and a half. And I also have a book that I'm almost finished with that I've been working on for about 5 years called We Learn to Live in the Castle Stories. And it's basically personal essays, memoir stories about my life from the time I was 2 years old and I was placed in a foster home for 5 months after my mother had a nervous breakdown to, just recently when my older sister Mary passed away a couple of years ago. So it's got 12 stories in it that span my life. So I've been working on that for about 5 years, and those are the next 2-3 projects.
Wow. So you're not busy at all. Neither one of you are busy. I see that. You guys should really get writing more. I'm just just throwing that out there.
and then in between, she throws out, nonfiction reporting stuff I see all the time on the internet. It's like, when did you have time to do this? Come on.
Well, I did just recently publish a long essay. I think it's 17,000 words, which I've been working on for a year and a half. It's basically about a notorious 1973 double homicide in Portland, Oregon of these 2 Black women. And they were murdered by a corrupt police officer who was also Black and a pimp and a drug dealer. And so I just published that about 5 days ago. I've been working on it for a year and a half, interviewing the family, looking up PPB personnel files, and that was a huge project. It was really hard. It was emotionally just really kind of taxing, and I'm so glad it's over with. I still may write a much shorter follow-up essay on it, but yeah, I try to put things out there on my Substack page when I can, especially if it's something short and political, because the politics in Portland are so messed up. And Portland is just such a different city now. It's not safe. I could go on.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, Bob is right. I do. See, that's the thing. You know, I just have to be doing something like that, or I get anxious.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with being productive. Like, people always say to me how fast I'm going all the time and doing stuff. And I always say, that's cool. I can rest when I'm dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't. Like, I'll have plenty of time. Okay. Well, go ahead.
When you think about it, all you really leave behind is your body of work.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. You know?
I tell people the thing that you get to make every day is memories.
Yeah.
Like, it's not stuff, it's memories. Let's go make some memories. Because I had somebody tell me a long time ago, it was actually an ex-boyfriend of mine had gone to visit his dad, who was in a nursing home. And there was an older Black gentleman who had the room across the hall, and he'd see him sitting on like those little walker seats, you know, like in the hallway watching people. And his dad was taken for a test, and he was talking to the guy, and the guy said to him, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically, you know, make sure you're making memories every day, because it doesn't matter how much money you have when you're sitting in this chair later. The only riches you're going to have are the memories.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've always felt that to be very true. So might as well create memories for you and memories for other people, because people read these works and you never know how they impact you, those people necessarily. Sometimes you get feedback, which is wonderful. And then, but it's impacting people, even though you might not hear about it.
Yeah.
I like reading dead authors and kind of following through their list of books or articles and see how they got to the last piece. You know, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Drinking with Authors fans. This is your host, Erica Lance. Because of the change of the format of the show, welcome to the literary briefs portion. Enjoy.
Okay. So the first question that is always asked, and I'm going to start with you, Robert. What is your favorite book of all time?
Oh my God. May I give you a couple?
Yeah, of course you can give me a couple. It's your podcast. You can do whatever you want.
All right. I'm going to go nonfiction. I love nonfiction. And I'll go with 3 authors, if that's okay.
Are we going with authors or books?
Well,
Okay, go with authors. You're just, Robert, you're breaking all the rules here. That's fine. Go ahead. Do what you're going to do.
Hitch 22. Hitch 22. Christopher Hitchens.
Okay.
Fabulous. Nonfiction essays, pieces about his life. He was an English writer. He died too early. Just an incredible brain. A former, you'll like this, Theresa, former magazine editor, Terry McDonald, called My Accidental Life. Fabulous. Stories about all the famous and infamous writers that he's worked with over the years and stories about them. And again, all nonfiction. And my third nonfiction, by a mainly fiction writer, John Le Carré. John Le Carré had a book out a few years before he passed away called The Pigeon Tunnel. The Pigeon Tunnel. And that's all stories about, it's nonfiction. It's all stories about famous people and, again, infamous people that he met over the years as he's doing research for his fiction work.
Interesting. Okay. I like it. Theresa, what about you?
Well, I'm going to follow Bob's pattern here, and I'm going to go with 3.
Okay.
For a long time, these are 3 books of fiction. For a long time, I love nonfiction, but strangely enough, I resonate more with fiction. But for a long time, my favorite book of all time, and I think it really still is my favorite book, my favorite novel, is called Suicide Blonde by Darcy Steinke. She's a New York writer, and I read it for the first time in the 90s and was blown away. It's about a girl named Jessie and her bisexual boyfriend, Dell, and living in San Francisco and everything that they go through. And it's very dark, it's very nihilistic, and I just really connected with it. I've read it, 12 times maybe. It's probably my favorite novel. One of my second favorite novels is by an English author her name is Julie Meyerson. It's called Me and the Fat Man. It's just one of those weird novels with just a small number of characters. It's a girl who works as a waitress in a restaurant, and she goes to a park and she prostitutes herself part-time. And she's got a past that's kind of muddled, and she finds out that her mother abandoned her for about a year in Greece, and it's just this weird novel. And then another favorite novel that I really resonated with in the 90s, mainly for the last 2 pages of it, it's Scott Turow's novel Presumed Innocent. There's the last 2 pages of it, there's this one section where he's riffing on Carolyn Polhemus and what it was that drew her to him, the character Rusty Savage. And you read this last page or so, and it's so moving, the compassion that he feels for this woman. And it's just, I would read it and I felt like I was that character, this woman with, filled with secrets and doing her best. And you have to read the last couple pages to kind of figure it out. But it's the only book, it's the only section of a book, if I read it out loud, I'll cry, because it's just, it gets me every time.
Wow.
So those are my 3 favorite books.
I love that. Okay, Theresa, it's going to be thrown back to you so that we're being fairsies, which is a technical term I just made up on my podcast. And I can do that because it's my podcast. What is your least favorite book of all time?
Oh, wow. I looked at 50 Shades of Grey, and I could only read about 3 pages before I just wanted to pull my hair out.
That book makes me want to punch babies. It's terrible.
She was a fan fiction writer, so she's not really a writer. I mean, I know that sounds elitist, but
well, I'll tell you this. I know a lot of fan fiction writers that are great writers.
Yes.
I think that is not, especially when they have it over time. There's some that are amazing, some that are not. And just like writing about the characters, what she did was grab the coattails of something. I mean, she has $1 bazillion. She grabbed the coattails of something and then got the best marketing campaign ever. Oh, this naughty, naughty book. That book is terribly written. It is horribly written. I don't understand her editor. Like, ugh. Anyway.
But I mean, I love books. It's hard for me to say what book I've read that I. But
it's your book choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, me and the Jen are going to explain this well. Just because you don't like it, or it's a book that you don't enjoy, because I've now had like 400 people on my show. Different people have different opinions on books. Yeah. You're allowed to have your opinion on the book. It's not like, well, you say this and then we're going to go destroy all those books. Oh, wait, Florida. It's not quite like that. So it's just a book you don't like. I mean, there's a lot of people that love 50 Shades of Grey. I couldn't even get past page 1. It was so bad. Like, yeah.
And that goes with like reading it like an editor. I was just like, oh God, there's so much wrong with this. I'm getting nervous. I have to put this down. But yeah. But I have so many favorite books. That's the problem. So many favorite books. But yeah, those 3 fiction books are probably my 3 favorites.
Okay. Robert, what about a book you did not like?
Erica, can I go with disappointing?
Yes, we can go with disappointing. What is your most disappointing book?
So I hate when people say so. But anyway, so like you're the authority now. What I'm about to say, so no. I read Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And correct me if I'm wrong, was that his first published book? You guys know?
No idea. Not a Hemingway fan.
But, it caught this is 100 years ago now, and it just caught people's relationships and traveling and Europe. And I just absolutely loved it. Then I started reading other Hemingway books, like the next one, Snows of Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
I couldn't get through it. I could not get through it. I was so disappointed. It was so corny. And everything that I loved about Sun Also Rises was gone. And the rhythm of it, the words, I am thoroughly disappointed by Ernest Hemingway.
My husband, Don DuPay, can't stand Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, here. Except for Sun Also Rises, which I love.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I say something that is wildly unpopular on this show. I can't stand Jane Austen.
Yeah.
I cannot.
Agree.
Yeah. Here's the thing is that I actually, and what I realized it is I can't stand slow burn books.
Yeah.
There is a pace that I need the book to go. I don't care how beautifully written it is. I'm using quotation marks. I just fucking get a move on. And it's not like I need the Fast and the Furious in my book, but I want it to be moving. Like when I write, and I'm very proud of this, and I've heard it many, many times, that I pull you into the story. Yeah. Like I want to read stories that I have a hard time putting down, or I fall asleep because I just get so exhausted in the wee hours of the morning reading, by my Kindle's light. I just can't stand slow burn books, and it doesn't matter how great the author might have been. Again, it's a personal preference. I know some people who absolutely love Jane. There's billions of Jane Austen fans in the world.
Sure.
I've tried to read Jane Austen probably 4 times, and the issue is extreme passive voice is so hard to connect with. Yeah. And it's that formal, dated, extreme passive voice, and it's just like you fall asleep. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, we're told that we're supposed to love these writers, and then you read them and you go, what?
Yeah.
Well, you know what I think would be, not that they do this in school anymore anyway. I don't know that there's a lot of assigned reading because my kids is growing up. They're now in their mid-20s. We're allowed to read whatever the crap sticks they wanted to do a book report on, which led to a book report on Twilight. But, I think that if they taught the classics, I'm using my quotation marks, for what they were, like, we're going to teach what passive voice really means. Here is Pride and Prejudice. Like, to get it, because I think that when you go, this is just a great work of fiction. Well, it's a great work of fiction to some people. That doesn't mean it's a great work of fiction to other people. Yeah. And I think that if it was phrased differently, like this is a good story because of this, it changes the narrative on reading that story. Yeah. But, it's kind of like a lot of the books, I think probably most of us on this particular call were forced to read. Like the only book I remember reading in school from the required reading list, no, I'm about to take that back. I liked The Catcher in the Rye.
Yes. Yeah.
I also liked To Kill a Mockingbird. I love To Kill a Mockingbird.
I still have to read that. I still have to read that.
That was school reading, my friend, but I think it takes, like, you have to end up really Lord of the Flies. So I take that back, 2 or 3, because Lord of the Flies is really interesting because a lot of people talk about it as if they've read the book. Yeah. Where they just have the Cliff Notes version of the book, but it's so actually true so much to this day about what happens in a societal situation. Yes. It's just, anyway. Absolutely. Go on forever with that. Okay.
Now all those books are burned now anyway, so you can't read them.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, luckily I have copies, but it's true. My favorite book of all time is called Bimbos of the Death Sun.
Who wrote that?
it's a mystery writer named Sharon McCrum. And this was written a really long time ago. I'm very fortunate that friends keep finding copies in used bookstores. Wow. But it was written, and you could tell she had to have been in this environment before conventions and nerd cons were cool, and they were like in the basement of hotels. It's a murder mystery set at one of these old timey conventions. And having been a nerd my entire life, like I knew these people in this book. It was the first book I ever laughed out loud while reading.
That's
actually, you know, when you have an emotional reaction when you're reading a book, and not just like, it's kind of like watching TV where you're like, that was really funny, versus when you watch it and you're actually laughing. If you're by yourself, you know. So can never judge a book by its name or cover. So let's talk about your favorite book that was turned into a movie or a TV series where you think they did a good job of it. Theresa.
Well, okay. The one book that makes me laugh, I mean, from start to finish, without a doubt, is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
That was done really well.
Oh God, that's the funniest book ever. That's a good one. But you know, there's another book I just recently got. I got a 1929 copy of it, and it was turned into a movie in 1930 with Paulette Goddard. It's called The Ex-Wife. It's by Ursula Parrott, and it is one of the best books I have ever read. It was published in 1929 anonymously because it was a scandal. You read this book, and it's like she's talking about dynamics that are as timeless today as they were in 1929. It's one of the best books, and that also was turned into a film. But yeah, I've read a few books that have been turned. You know, I actually read only part of it, but The Count of Monte Cristo with Richard Chamberlain. I love that film. You know, the book is good, but the film is better.
Okay. Robert, what about you?
I'm going to go nonfiction book again. All the President's Men. Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. I just watched the film directed by Alan Pakula for the 8th time the other night on Amazon, and got a refund from Amazon because it stopped a couple of times during the showing and did the little circle thing. So I got my $3.99 back. But that's the 8th time I've seen the film. Every time I watch this film, I see new things. I read the book when it came out back in the 70s. Again, you know, it's all about the end of the Nixon regime. And the fact that they concentrate, the story is really the two writers. And I love reading about writers. And it's their story. It's how they are, you know, one guy is a new guy at the Washington Post. The other guy is working on Metro or something, and how they know that they are better when they work together. They make each other better, and they interview people and put together this whole scenario about the Watergate break-in and Nixon and his people who were behind it. And it's just an incredible book. And it's one of those rare moments when a great book is made into a great movie.
Very cool. Now the opposite. Where did they do a terrible job translating the book to a movie or a TV show?
Oh, wow.
Robert, you're up first.
Wow. It's probably going to be one of those best-selling books that everybody talked about, and then it came out and you went, huh? But, wow.
I had somebody on the last podcast I recorded mention Where the Crawdads Sing, because that book was actually really, really well written.
Yeah.
That movie was fucking terrible. You know what? It's interesting is that a co-host I used to have said to me that you should treat movies of books like fan fiction. So because you're never going to get everything that the book encapsulated into the movie. You're just not going to get that. But to me, there's tends to be kind of a heart to the story, or a part of the story you can tell really, really well.
Yeah.
And you have to choose what part it is and start it from the right part of the story that you're going to tell. And they did not do that in Where the Crawdads Sing.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay. I've got one.
Go.
I'm going to stay with Carl Bernstein for a second.
Okay.
His ex-wife, Nora Ephron, wrote a great book, among other great books and screenplays and stuff that she wrote, called Heartburn. Great book. Terrible movie. Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep just didn't work.
Wow.
Didn't work. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
For a number of reasons. Maybe the material was just too tough to translate to the big screen, and
it takes a skilled writer to write a story because in books there's so much exposition. I think this is the key that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
Very few books don't have a lot of exposition to get to trying to tell the story.
Yeah.
They're supposed to have a lot of exposition because that's what gets you to set the scene to whatever, which is not built for film medium or TV. I've written a lot of plays, like, and I've written screenplays and stuff like that. And it's very different taking the contents and trying to show somebody something versus, I think, or tell somebody something, because you have little things where you go, oh, how's your ex-dad today? Your ex-husband today. Well, in the book, there's a whole story that leads to how you know that's the person's ex-husband.
Yeah.
And in the TV show, you got to go, how's your ex-husband, Rob? Just to get that wrapped up. All the exposition got wrapped up. We know he's an ex-husband. Moving on. Yeah.
Because there's no time. You got to keep moving. You don't have the time to have that 5-minute story about the ex, so yeah.
Agreed. Okay, Theresa. Oh, sorry.
I think that probably the worst film made from a book was the film adaptation, which was based on the Susan Orlean book, The Orchid Thief, which I loved and is a hilarious book about John LaRoche, who used to go to the Fakahatchee Strand in Florida and steal the ghost orchids. And it's kind of I'm not sure if she wrote it as nonfiction or kind of a novelized book, but it's basically a true story. It's called The Orchid Thief. And they did this film called Adaptation with Nicolas Cage, kind of based on it. And it was horrible. It was dark and stupid. And it just didn't capture the essence of the book by Susan Orlean. It's one of my favorite books. It's called The Orchid Thief. Such a good book. Definitely a terrible a film adaptation. It's called Adaptation.
Wow.
Got it.
Totally
Okay.
disappointing. I remember watching it and I was like, this is ridiculous,
So a couple more questions before we end off here. What is your favorite weird food combination?
Ooh. I have a lot.
Okay, Theresa, let's hear a couple of them. Let's do it.
Well, I love garlic mashed potatoes with a big plate of raw vegetables. But I love to eat, to make vegetable delight, which is a kind of a vegetarian stir-fry dish, and cover it with blackened cashews. I don't know if that's weird, but I love it.
I don't know how weird that is, I think. Okay, Robert, you're going to have to one-up her weirdness, because that wasn't very weird.
I don't think I can even beat that. I am an onion freak. I love onions. So you'll see me having a hamburger, and most of it is onion with a little piece of meat underneath it. It's ridiculous, but
that's actually how I like them too.
Yeah.
I'll go to once in a while. We'll get a cheeseburger at a restaurant. I always ask for extra onions.
And
this much onion.
Yeah. My wife will say, "Why don't you have a hamburger with that piece of onion you have?" It's ridiculous.
Okay, if you guys could be any mythological creature or fantastical creature, what would you be?
I'd probably be a unicorn.
I like it.
Unicorn. Wow.
Because
What?
I could fly.
Oh.
So a Pegasus unicorn. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
I don't have a character, but yeah, I'm going to go with flying. Anything with flying is.
How about a dragon, Robert? Do you want to be a dragon? They're pretty.
No, I don't want to be that large, and I don't want to like breathe flames and stuff. I just want to take off and fly.
Okay.
I don't know what that is though.
You could be
Yeah,
a
no.
Griffin.
Really bad at this. Sorry.
That's
You could
okay.
be a Griffin.
Yeah, Griffin. Griffins fly.
Oh, Griffin. Yeah, of course. There you go.
Gryphon.
Yes, you could totally do that. There we go. Okay, so final question, then we'll do some shameless self-promotion. If you could go into any literary world, actually, I'm going to ask you two questions. So I want this one and I want one other one from you too. If you could go into any literary universe, where would you want to go?
New York. Does that answer your question?
What literary universe is New York?
Just the New York publishing scene.
I was talking about like Narnia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, wow. That's
Robert, do you have an answer?
Yeah. Theresa, while you're thinking, does this work going like 1920s Paris?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. The whole image of sitting outdoor, at the table with your little cup of coffee and talking to John Paul Sartre and, jotting down things and then going back to your room and drinking some more and then writing something and starting it all over the next day. And that whole 20s Paris, sun also rises. That's part of it.
Actually,
that's why I love that.
Actually, I've written 3 papers on the expatriate movement, so I second that. If I could go to a place in the universe, a literary place in the universe, it would be 1920s Paris, the expatriate movement, Juna Barnes, F. Scott Fitzgerald, even Ernest Hemingway, etc.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, just don't sit at the same table with Robert and Ernest. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So, okay, then if you guys could have lunch with any author, living or dead, who would you want to have lunch with?
Scott Turow.
Why?
He's amazing. And I sent him an email about 6 years ago. I went online. I thought, I'm just going to Google Scott Turow's email. And I found his email and I sent him an email. And I told him that he could have written this one book a little bit better. It was kind of tongue in cheek, and he responded.
Wow.
And so we've emailed each other every 2 or 3 years. And I think he just kind of puts up with me. I'm a huge fan. He's super smart. I loved one of his first books. It was called, it was his book about being in law school at Harvard called, what was it? Something L. It's when he was in a freshman in law school at Harvard, and he's just a writer that I've admired for so long. And those last 2 pages of Presumed Innocent, the only writing that if I read it out loud will reduce me to tears. And some people might read it and think this is a little hokey, it's not that good or whatever, but he's just a writer that I've always really admired, and it would be a thrill to meet him, and he's still alive.
Yeah.
Very cool. Robert, what about you?
I'm gonna go nonfiction again. Michael Palin, ex of Monty Python and movies and TV shows, has written a number of books about his travel shows and all that stuff. But he has 3 diary books where he writes about each day for they're 10 or 12 years per book. And there's stuff going on. Then there's, with career, there's stuff going on with family. His sister committed suicide, on and on and on and on. And to make each single day, you mentioned, Theresa, writing something down every day. To make each day interesting is like, wow. And I can't stop reading. He's got 3 of them so far, I think. I think he's working on a fourth, another big hunk of time book coming out. But to make each day that interesting is like, wow, that is incredible. So anyway, I'd like to sit down with him and have a coffee and just talk, about his life in, half an hour.
Awesome. You guys have been so much fun for part 2 of the podcast.
Same here, Erica. You're pretty good at this.
Oh, well, thank you. That's why they paid me the big bucks.
You've only interviewed 500 people.
I'm drunk most of the time when I'm doing it, though, so win-win for me. Just kidding. So let's do shameless self-promotion. Theresa, I'm going to let you start. Where do people find you in your 20,000 Twitter handles?
You can find me on Facebook. My Facebook name is Theresa Kennedy Dupay. That's my legal name, but I'm on Twitter, Theresa Griffin Kennedy. I have 2 Instagram pages on Twitter. One's private, one's public. I have a Substack page, Theresa Griffin Kennedy. I have a Medium page, and I'm also on Muckrack. Although I'm not certified, I'm not a verified journalist, but so.
Well, you're not verified. No, just kidding.
Right.
Robert, what about you?
I have a Facebook page, which people told me to get 10 years ago to move product. Robert Crane, along with, you'll see, I'm sorry, I got to do this again. You'll see this on the page, so you'll know it's that, the real one. And then Robert David Crane on Amazon.
Very cool. And the book that inspired you to be on this podcast?
It's got to be this one.
Beyond Where the Buses
Run. Stories.
Yeah.
Edited by Theresa Griffin Kennedy. Cover photo by Joe Coyle, who could not be with us today.
Beautiful photo. Yeah.
Love it.
Very, very cool. You guys are amazing. Thank you for being on the podcast with me.
Thanks, Erica.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time.